In a small, cluttered apartment on the outskirts of Madrid, surrounded by the hum of city life and the occasional echo of a passing train, Marisol sat at the kitchen table, her hands shaking as she flipped through an old, worn photo album. Each picture told a different story. A younger version of herself, laughing on a beach with a man whose name now carried bitterness in her heart, and a tiny boy, no older than 3, with wide brown eyes and curly hair, smiling up at her. Her son, Tomas, now 15, had grown into a teenager with the same determined eyes that she had once seen in the man who promised her forever, only for him to vanish the moment things got difficult. Tomas had been her everything, her reason to wake up every day, but as he grew older, his dreams became bigger than the cramped apartment and the struggles they faced. Ever since he could walk, Tomas had kicked a ball against the walls, his little feet moving with an undeniable rhythm, a promise of something greater. "I'm going to play for Real Madrid, Mom," he would say, the innocent certainty in his voice making her heart swell with hope. She knew how much Tomas wanted this, how he wanted to escape the shadow of their past, and show the world that he was capable of something extraordinary. But with every passing year, the dream felt more distant. Tomas had inherited his father's European features, pale skin, light eyes, but he carried his mother's dark heritage with him too, the sharp contrast that, in a city like Madrid, often meant more trouble than he could understand. Marisol, a woman of color, had spent her life feeling the sting of racism and prejudice. It wasn't just the sideways glances from strangers on the street. It was the job she couldn't get, the insults whispered under people's breath, the way her presence in the same room with her ex-husband had been treated as an anomaly rather than a love story. She had fallen for a man who said he loved her, only to be abandoned when their love became inconvenient. He had left her with a son, a legacy of broken promises, and dreams that felt like they belonged to someone else. Tomas, in contrast, had the gifts that made him a natural athlete. He was quick on his feet, his body honed from years of kicking around a worn-out football, training himself in the streets. But what his mother didn't know, what Tomas hadn't shared with her, was the way the world was beginning to see him differently. He was no longer just a boy with a dream. He was a young black man in a world that valued his talent, but also wanted to remind him of his place. At school, the boys who once admired him for his skills had begun to treat him differently. They were all white, from families who had money, who played for the elite teams, and Tomas was just another immigrant kid who didn't belong, despite the fact that his talent had earned him the right to try out for some of the best youth teams in the city. It was the first time Tomas felt the weight of his heritage on his shoulders, the burden of being not quite one thing and not quite another. He was a Spaniard by birth, but to many, he was still just a reminder of everything they feared. At every practice, every trial, Tomas could feel the unspoken words, the sneers, the quiet judgment. The other kids, who didn't have to deal with the whispers of, "Go back to where you came from," on the playground, or the quiet dismissal of a coach who didn't see his potential as worthy of attention. Marisol noticed the change in her son. He had stopped talking about Real Madrid with the same fire in his voice. When she asked about his training, he would shrug it off, and sometimes he wouldn't even come home until late at night. It wasn't the same boy who used to talk about football like it was the only thing in the world. One evening, after he had returned from a particularly grueling session with a local club team, Marisol decided to confront him. Tomas sat on the edge of his bed, his head in his hands, not looking at her. "You're not eating enough, Tomas. You're getting thinner by the day. What's going on?" she asked gently, sitting beside him. Tomas looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and confusion. "They don't want me, Mom. They don't care about me because I'm different," he muttered, his voice cracking. "I'm good enough to play, but I'm not white enough to belong. No matter how many goals I score, they see me as just a problem they don't want to deal with. I'm never going to make it. It's not even about football anymore. It's about me not fitting in." Marisol's heart broke, her son's pain echoing in her chest. She had always tried to shield him from the cruelty of the world, tried to protect him from the judgments she herself had faced, but this was something new. This wasn't just about being poor or not having the right connections. This was about something deeper, something woven into the fabric of their lives in a way she couldn't shield him from. She had been in Spain for over 2 decades, trying to make a life, but she had never truly felt like she belonged. She had accepted it, learned to navigate it, but Tomas was different. He didn't just want to exist in the shadows, he wanted to be seen. He wanted to break free of the chains of prejudice that had been placed around him. "You are more than they can see," Marisol whispered, her voice soft but firm. "You've always been more than enough. Don't let them make you feel small. Your dreams are just as big as theirs. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But Tomas wasn't sure he believed her. He had heard her words before, but it didn't change what he saw every day. The exclusion, the sideways glances, the coaches who smiled at his footwork but never offered a real opportunity. He had tried. He had put his heart into his game, but it wasn't enough to overcome the weight of the world that sat on his shoulders. His mother had given him everything, and he had given everything back to the game. But now, that dream seemed so far out of reach. Still, as the days passed, Marisol watched him struggle, and she knew deep down that if Tomas was going to make it, if he was going to rise above the cruelty and discrimination that sought to define him, he was going to need more than talent. He was going to need the courage to fight back, to face every obstacle, every injustice, and rise above it. And so, she made a decision. With her savings, she found a new opportunity, a new door for Tomas to walk through. A coach, a mentor, someone who had seen the spark in Tomas when no one else did, someone who believed that this young boy, with his undeniable talent, could be the one to change the narrative. Marisol arranged the meeting, a moment that would change the course of Tomas's life forever. But in the shadows, others began to notice Tomas's rise. And not everyone was happy about it. As Tomas prepared for his trial with the new team, he could feel the pressure building, his own doubts, and the silent whispers of those who still saw him as less than what he was. The question was no longer whether Tomas had the ability to succeed. The question was whether the world was ready to see him as he truly was. Would he break through the walls of racism, or would they crush him underfoot before he even had the chance to step onto the field? The day of the trial arrived with an air of tension that hung thick in the atmosphere. The sun blazed down on the cracked streets of Madrid, casting long shadows over the city as Tomas stood before the gates of the training facility, his heart racing in his chest. His mother had walked with him to the edge of the grounds, her hand on his back, offering silent support, but there was an ache deep within her that she couldn't shake. She had seen him struggle for so long, seen his light dim with every insult, every closed door, and now, as he stood on the cusp of something that could change his life forever, she feared that the world would refuse to see him for who he truly was. She had known the bitterness of rejection in a society that judged her for the color of her skin, a society that had never truly accepted her. And now Tomas, her son, was about to face the same fight, a battle for something more than just a spot on the field. It was a fight for his very identity. "You've got this, Tomas," she whispered, her voice steady but strained. Tomas didn't respond immediately. He only looked ahead, his gaze distant, as if bracing himself for the battle ahead. His breath was shallow, his palms slick with sweat, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of the boy who had once dreamed without fear, without hesitation. But now, those dreams felt weighted, laden with the burden of reality. The trial was no longer just about football. It was about proving to the world that a young man like him, with his dark skin and his heritage, had just as much right to belong as anyone else. He had been told countless times in whispers and sideways glances that he didn't belong, that he was an outsider in a game that was meant to be for the privileged, for the chosen ones, the elite. And yet here he was, standing at the threshold of that same world, fighting for his place in it. He walked onto the field with his head held high, ignoring the way the coach's eyes flicked over him, sizing him up with their practiced gazes. He was just another kid to them, another hopeful among hundreds, but in his chest, his heart pounded with the weight of his family's hopes and his own unspoken fears. The coaches blew their whistles, the players lined up, and Tomas fell into the rhythm of the drills. His movements were fluid, his feet quick as he danced around the ball, weaving in and out, creating space where there was none, but even as he played, he felt the eyes on him. The way they lingered just a little too long, the way the younger boys looked at him like he was somehow different. They had all heard the whispers, about his background, about his race, and Tomas couldn't help but feel their judgment in every stride he took. It was the same with every practice, every game. He could feel the subtle rejection that wasn't spoken aloud but carried in the way the ball was passed to him less often, in the way the coach's praise always came with an asterisk. Tomas wasn't oblivious to the way the world worked, the way they only wanted him if he was good enough to entertain them, to make them feel proud of him. If he didn't meet their expectations, then he would be discarded like so many others who had come before him. He had spent so much of his life trying to fit in, trying to prove to the world that he was just as worthy as anyone else, but now, in the midst of the trial, the cruel reality of what he faced became impossible to ignore. He had to be perfect. He had to be better than anyone else on that field, not just to earn a spot, but to prove that he was more than the color of his skin. The trial went on for hours, each moment feeling like an eternity, each sprint, each pass, each shot, a battle against both his body and the weight of his past. And when it was finally over, Tomas stood there, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face, his body aching from the exertion, but his eyes were locked on the coaches. They didn't say much, their faces unreadable, but Tomas knew. He knew that they had seen him, really seen him, for the first time. But he also knew that it wasn't enough. He was still the outsider. He was still the one who had to prove himself, who had to fight harder, faster, longer, just to be seen as equal. The coaches offered him a polite handshake, a curt nod, and a few words of encouragement, but Tomas could feel the underlying emptiness of their praise. He had given everything, and yet, somehow, it still wasn't enough. He had been a machine on that field, executing every move to perfection, but none of it mattered. He had always known that it would come down to this, that even if he played better than anyone else, even if he surpassed every expectation, there would always be something holding him back. He wasn't just fighting for a spot on a football team. He was fighting for his place in a world that never fully accepted him. After the trial, Tomas didn't say much to his mother. They walked home in silence, the weight of the day hanging heavily between them. Marisol could feel the tension in him, the disappointment that clung to his shoulders like a heavy cloak, and she knew what he was thinking. The same thing she had feared all along. The world had rejected him once again. As they reached their apartment, Tomas finally spoke, his voice low, defeated. "I tried, Mom. I really did. But it doesn't matter. It's never going to be enough." Marisol stood in the doorway, her heart aching for him, but her voice was steady. "You are enough, Tomas. You always have been. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise." Tomas shook his head, his eyes dark with frustration. "I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of feeling like I have to prove myself all the time. Why can't I just be good enough for them?" Marisol stepped closer, placing her hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but comforting. "Because you are good enough, Tomas. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You have a fire inside you that no one can take away, no matter what they say. And that's what makes you special. Don't forget that." But Tomas wasn't so sure. The dream he had clung to for so long, the dream of playing for Real Madrid, of rising above the circumstances of his birth, of showing the world that he was more than what they saw, seemed impossible now. The road ahead felt too long, too fraught with obstacles he wasn't sure he could overcome. The world had shown him how cruel it could be, how unwilling to change it was, and for the first time, Tomas wasn't sure he had the strength to keep fighting. But Marisol, even in her own pain, refused to let him give up. She had fought her entire life just to survive, just to make a life for herself and Tomas in a world that constantly told her she didn't belong. She had faced the worst of what society had to offer, but she had never given up. She had survived, and she knew that Tomas had the same strength inside him. "We don't stop fighting, Tomas," she said softly, her eyes filled with determination. "We keep going, no matter what. You have the world inside you, and no one can take that from you." Tomas looked at her, his eyes searching for the strength he had lost. And in that moment, something changed. He realized that maybe it wasn't about winning, about being accepted into the elite clubs or proving to the world that he was good enough. Maybe it was about something deeper, something more important, the courage to continue despite the obstacles, the resilience to stand tall even when the world tried to push him down. He had always wanted to play for Real Madrid, but now, more than ever, Tomas knew that his true victory would come when he stopped letting the world dictate who he was and started believing in himself, no matter how many doors were slammed in his face. Tomas sat on the edge of his bed that night, the dim light from the street lamp outside casting faint shadows on the walls. His mother was in the kitchen, humming a quiet tune as she worked, but Tomas couldn't find the energy to join her, to speak with her like they had before. Instead, he stared at the worn-out football cleats sitting by his bedside, the leather cracked from years of practice, the laces frayed from countless games. He ran his fingers over them absently, the sound of his mother's soft voice barely reaching him, as his mind wandered to that moment on the pitch earlier that day. His heart still ached, a dull throb that wouldn't go away. He had tried. He had tried so hard to prove himself, to show everyone that he was more than just a name, more than the color of his skin. He had imagined playing in those famous white and purple jerseys, running across the stadium under the floodlights with the crowd cheering, but now the dream seemed so distant, so unreachable. He felt the weight of every failure, every rejection, every whispered word from the coaches, every glance from the other players, as if they saw him as nothing more than a token, a symbol they could never truly accept. He had been so certain that this was his chance, that this trial would be different, that he would finally earn a place for himself. But now, in the silence of the room, it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. Maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe no matter how good he was, no matter how much he had sacrificed, the world would always find a reason to keep him out. The harsh reality of it stung deep, and Tomas wondered if he was just fooling himself all along. He had heard the stories, the whispers. Football wasn't just about skill. It was about who you knew, what background you came from, and how well you could fit into a system that was built for a different kind of person, a different kind of player. He wasn't that player. He could feel his resolve weakening, his dreams flickering like a candle in the wind, but even as his mind spiraled, he couldn't shake the voice in the back of his head, the one that told him to keep going, to keep pushing, because that was all he knew. It was the voice his mother had given him, the voice that had kept her going all those years, the voice that told him to rise up against a world that had no intention of welcoming him. He couldn't let it go, not yet. He wasn't ready to give up, but the weight of his fear, the pressure of knowing that no matter how much effort he put in, he might never be accepted into the world he longed to be a part of, it was unbearable. Tomas felt the tears start to well up in his eyes, and he quickly wiped them away, shaking his head as if trying to shake off the weight of it all. His mother had always told him that his strength was in his spirit, in his heart, but now, more than ever, he wondered if that was enough. What if he didn't have the power to fight anymore? What if the world really had beaten him, stripped him of his will, and left him with nothing? His mind kept returning to the trial, the look in the coach's eyes, the way they had dismissed him without even knowing him. It wasn't just his performance that had let him down, but the world that was unwilling to see him as more than what they expected, more than the boy from the wrong side of the tracks, more than the child of a woman who had never belonged to their world. Tomas' mind turned over the memories of his childhood, growing up in the shadow of Madrid's bustling streets, his mother always struggling to make ends meet, always carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. He had watched her, his eyes full of awe and admiration, as she worked tirelessly to give him a life better than the one she had known. She was everything to him, his protector, his teacher, the one who had shown him that despite the cruelty of the world, he could rise above it. And yet, even she hadn't been able to escape the harshness of society, the discrimination that haunted her every step, the looks that followed her when she walked into a room, the slurs whispered behind her back. Tomas had learned early on that the world was not kind to those who looked like him. He had learned that his mother's battle was a battle he would inherit, one that he had no choice but to face head-on. She had never given up, no matter how many doors were slammed in her face, and Tomas had followed in her footsteps, believing that if he worked hard enough, if he proved himself enough, the world would eventually have to acknowledge him. But now, standing on the edge of his dreams, Tomas wasn't so sure anymore. He stood up, suddenly restless, pacing the room as the weight of his thoughts grew heavier. He needed to get out, to do something, anything to distract himself from the spiraling fear in his chest. He pulled on his sneakers, grabbed his jacket, and left the room without a word to his mother. She was used to his silences, knew better than to push when he was in one of his moods, but Tomas knew that his actions spoke louder than his words. He couldn't explain it to her right now. She had been so strong for him, always there to remind him that he was enough. He didn't want her to see him break, to see the cracks in his own resolve. He wandered the streets of Madrid, lost in his thoughts, the noise of the city buzzing around him like a distant hum. He passed by the bustling squares, the bright lights of the shops, but it all seemed so far removed from the pain he carried inside. He kept walking, his thoughts consumed with what might have been, what he had hoped for, and what he feared would never come to pass. The night air was cool against his skin, and for a moment, he allowed himself to think about nothing else. But even then, he couldn't escape it, the feeling that something was slipping away, something that he had fought for all his life, something that was slipping through his fingers no matter how hard he tried to hold on. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning, when Tomas finally returned home, that he found his mother waiting for him. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there quietly, her eyes soft, understanding. He could see the worry in her face, the fear that had been gnawing at her for days, and yet there she was, waiting for him to return. He didn't want to let her see how much he was hurting, but he knew she could feel it anyway. She always had. Tomas sank into the chair across from her, his hands gripping the arms, as if they were the only thing keeping him upright. "I don't know what to do, Mom," he confessed, his voice raw, cracking under the weight of everything. "I've tried so hard, but it feels like it's never going to be enough. I'm not good enough for them. I'm not good enough for football. I'm not good enough for this world." His mother's eyes softened, and she reached out, placing her hand over his, steady and warm. "You are good enough, Tomas. You always have been. You're not fighting for their approval, you're fighting for yourself. And that's something no one can take from you." The tears he had been holding back finally slipped free, and Tomas let them fall, feeling the relief of finally voicing what he had been carrying inside. "I don't know if I can keep fighting, Mom. I'm so tired." She squeezed his hand, her voice firm and full of love. "You don't have to fight alone, Tomas. I'm here. And you don't have to fight for their acceptance. Just fight for your own." The words felt like a balm, soothing the ache in his chest, but Tomas knew that the road ahead would be just as hard as it had always been. He wasn't sure what the future held, or what would happen with his dreams of playing for Real Madrid. But for the first time in a long time, he knew that his mother was right. The fight wasn't about winning their approval. It was about finding the courage to keep going, no matter the odds. He would find a way. He had to. Tomas sat there in the quiet, with his mother's words ringing in his ears, trying to let them sink in, trying to let them pierce through the fog of doubt that had clouded his heart. The tears were still fresh on his face, but the weight in his chest felt unbearable. His dreams of playing for Real Madrid, of stepping onto that grand pitch under the blinding lights, the stadium roaring with cheers, seemed like distant echoes now, fading and fading as he struggled to keep his hope alive. The world outside the four walls of their tiny apartment had always been a harsh place, a place that showed him time and again that no matter how hard you worked, no matter how much you sacrificed, there were always forces in motion that were beyond your control. The sting of rejection was a familiar one, but each time it cut deeper, leaving scars that grew more painful, more real. It wasn't just the rejection from the coaches or the players that hurt. It was the weight of the history that weighed on him, the history of his mother's struggles, of the walls that had been built around him before he even had a chance to prove who he was. He thought about the way the coaches had dismissed him, how his size, his skin color, had always been an obstacle to others even when it never seemed like it would be to him. And that was the truth, wasn't it? He had never been allowed to be just a kid with a passion for football, just a young man with a dream. His world, their world, was always filled with whispers, with sideways glances that told him he would never belong. The anger he felt for that injustice bubbled up again, hotter than ever, but it wasn't the kind of anger that would lead to action. It was the kind of anger that ate away at you, turning you into something cold, something resigned. Tomas had always been the kind of person who wanted to believe in the goodness of people, to believe that if he just tried hard enough, he could win them over, that he could prove to the world that he was worth more than the assumptions they had made about him. But the more he tried, the more the world seemed to push back. He could still remember the stares he had gotten when he walked onto that field for his trial, the uncomfortable silence that descended over the other players when they saw him. It was as if they didn't believe someone like him could belong in a place like that. Maybe they didn't even think he belonged on the field, to be honest. He wasn't like the other boys, slim and fast, with the right color to fit in. He was bigger, heavier, and no matter how much he trained, how many hours he spent on his fitness, there was always something about him that others couldn't accept. He rubbed his face, trying to gather himself. His mother's hand was still on his, warm and steady, like a constant in the storm of his thoughts. "You've been through a lot, Tomas," she said quietly, her voice softer than it had been before. "And you've made it through every single time." Tomas could feel the weight of her gaze on him, the way she always seemed to see right through him, to understand him in a way no one else could. Her resilience had always been his anchor, the thing that held him steady even when everything around him seemed to be collapsing. But even now, as she spoke, he couldn't escape the feeling that things were slipping away from him. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep going like this. The fight felt endless, like running up a hill that only got steeper the more you climbed. "But Mom, what if it's not enough? What if I'm just not cut out for this? For football, for anything?" His voice cracked on the last word, and the vulnerability he had kept buried for so long flooded to the surface. His mother's grip tightened slightly, and she pulled him into a hug, her arms wrapping around him like the shelter he had always needed. She didn't say anything for a long moment, just held him there, letting him release all the frustration and the pain that had built up over the years. He could feel her heartbeat against his, steady and strong, a reminder that even when the world felt like it was breaking him, there was still something solid to hold on to. She pulled back slightly, her face serious now. "You are more than the world has given you, Tomas. I know you don't see it right now, but you are. You are so much more. And if they can't see that, it's their loss, not yours." Her voice was firm, her words like a rope thrown to him in the midst of a storm. Tomas wanted to believe her, he really did. But it was hard, so hard to see past the walls that had been built around him, to see beyond the doors that had been closed, and every moment of doubt only seemed to reinforce the belief that maybe his mother was wrong, that maybe the world wasn't going to give him the chance she so desperately wanted him to have. "You've worked harder than anyone I know, Tomas. Don't let them break you. Don't let them make you believe that your dreams aren't worth chasing." He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to just feel the weight of his mother's love. The warmth of it wrapped around him like a blanket, giving him the strength to face the fear that had been holding him back. Maybe, just maybe, his mother was right. Maybe he hadn't come this far just to give up now. The next day, Tomas didn't go to the football pitch. Instead, he found himself sitting in the small, crowded cafe where his mother worked, watching the world go by through the dusty window. She had sent him off to think, to clear his head. He had decided to take her advice, to think about what mattered most to him. And when he did, he realized that it wasn't just the game, the contract, the chance to play for Real Madrid. It was something deeper, something more personal. It was about proving to himself that he was more than what the world had told him he could be. It was about showing that the dreams his mother had given him, the resilience and strength she had instilled in him, were worth holding on to. He wasn't just fighting for a jersey, for a place on a team. He was fighting for his right to exist in this world as he was, without apology, without being defined by the color of his skin or the weight of his body. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. He stood up suddenly, determination flooding his chest. He wasn't going to let this moment slip away. The world wasn't ready for him, but that didn't matter. He was going to make them ready. He was going to show them what it meant to be someone who didn't belong, and yet still fought to carve out a place in the world. He walked out of the cafe, his steps steady, his heart strong. And as he stepped out into the sun, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he was finally ready to fight for himself. Tomas spent the next few weeks in a daze, his mind and heart pulled in different directions, as he grappled with the weight of his decision. Every step forward felt like a battle, every moment a test of his resolve. The world outside had not changed. It was still as unforgiving, still as determined to crush him under its unyielding weight. But Tomas was beginning to see it differently. His mother's words, the quiet but unshakable love she had always given him, became the foundation upon which he stood. They no longer felt like hollow words. They felt like the truth, a truth that he had been too afraid to accept. Every day was a new fight, a fight against the old wounds that had been inflicted on him over the years, against the prejudice and hatred that followed him like a shadow, against the belief that he wasn't enough, that he would never be enough. But now, for the first time in his life, Tomas understood that the only thing standing between him and his future was the fear inside of him, the fear that had held him back for so long. His dreams of football, of playing for Real Madrid, still burned within him, but they no longer held the same power over him. They had become more than just a desire to prove himself to the world. They had become a testament to his survival, a reflection of the love and determination his mother had poured into him. Every time he stepped onto the pitch, every time he kicked a ball or ran across the grass, he was fighting for something deeper than fame or recognition. He was fighting for his right to exist, to be seen, to be loved. One afternoon, as he was practicing alone in a rundown field just outside of town, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. He turned to see a figure standing in the distance, a man with a clipboard in hand. Tomas froze, unsure of what to expect. The man walked closer, and Tomas recognized him. He was one of the scouts, who had come to watch him play during his first tryout. Tomas's heart raced, his mind running through a million possibilities. Had he been forgotten? Was this another rejection, another door closed in his face? But the scout's expression was different this time. There was no judgment, no dismissiveness. He stepped forward, extending his hand. "Tomas, right? I remember you from the trial a while ago." Tomas hesitated for a moment, then shook the man's hand. "Yeah, that's me," he replied, his voice a little strained. What are you doing here?" The scout smiled, a little hesitant, like he wasn't quite sure how to put the words together. "We've been keeping an eye on you," he said. "I know things didn't go as expected the first time around, but we see something in you. We see something we didn't see before." Tomas's chest tightened, a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope flooding his veins. "You're not joking, are you?" The scout shook his head. "No, not at all. We want you to come to Madrid. We want to give you a shot." The world seemed to shift beneath Tomas's feet, and for a moment, it felt like everything was moving in slow motion. He had dreamed of this moment for so long, and yet now that it was here, it was almost too overwhelming to comprehend. He looked at the scout, then at the dusty field beneath his feet. He had spent so many hours here, training alone, dreaming of something more, something bigger. But this was beyond anything he could have imagined. He wanted to shout, to jump for joy, but instead, he simply nodded. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You don't have to say anything right now," the scout said, his voice firm but kind. "But I'm giving you this opportunity, Tomas. This is your chance. You've earned it." Tomas stood there, the weight of it all sinking in. He thought of his mother, of all the sacrifices she had made for him, of the long nights she had stayed up worrying, of the way she had always been there for him, no matter what. She had given him everything, her love, her strength, her hope, and now, it seemed, the world was finally offering him something in return. He wanted to run to her, to tell her the news, to share in the joy of this moment. But before he could, the scout spoke again. "There's one thing you need to understand, though," he said, his voice lower now, almost apologetic. Tomas's stomach sank. "What is it?" "There will be obstacles. There will be people who question you, who doubt you. You're different from the others, Tomas. You know that, right?" Tomas nodded, his jaw tightening. "I know. But you've got something the others don't. You've got heart. You've got the hunger to prove yourself. And that's what will carry you through." Tomas didn't know if he believed it fully, but there was something in the scout's words that made him want to. He had spent his entire life fighting against the idea that he wasn't good enough, and now, here was someone telling him that it was the very thing that made him special. Maybe that was the key all along, that his fight wasn't just about football or proving his worth to others. It was about proving it to himself. As the scout left, Tomas stood there, the wind ruffling his hair, the sun beginning to set behind him. He was no longer just a boy with a dream. He was a man with a purpose, with a future that was suddenly wide open before him. He walked home that evening with a sense of determination he hadn't felt before. He knew there would be challenges ahead. He knew that his path would never be easy. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid of the rejection, of the prejudice, of the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had his mother's love, and now he had the chance to prove to the world that he was worth more than the sum of its expectations. Tomas was no longer just chasing a dream. He was claiming it as his own. When he arrived home, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, as usual, her face weary but full of quiet strength. When she saw him standing there, her eyes flickered with curiosity. "What's going on?" she asked, already sensing the shift in him. Tomas took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, he didn't know how to find the words. "Mom," he said softly, "I've got a chance. I've got a chance to go to Madrid. They want me to join the team." The silence that followed was heavy, like a breath held in time. Then his mother stood, her hand shaking as she embraced him, and Tomas knew, in that moment, that no matter where life took him, he would always have the love that had carried him through it all. No matter what happened next, he had won. If you found this story moving and want to see more gripping, emotional tales, don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on the latest content. Your support means the world, and it helps us bring more stories to life. Thank you for being part of this journey.